What's up, y'all? Welcome back to A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers, the podcast here on Grind City Media. We are coming to you live from the Built for Tough studio here in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm Lane Whitaker. I'm here with my guy, Russ Bankston, who wrote this book, A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers. That's out now. We've been working our way through this book, telling the stories of the sneakers and basketball and our own stories and all sorts of stuff. And now we get to, for our purposes, Chapter 11, Episode 11 of the podcast. And it just worked out that number 11 for us is the Nike Air Jordan 11.
Yeah, if I was thinking, I would have made that Chapter 11 in the book, but then it wouldn't be 11 for us, and it would be so...
But the book's also sort of chronological, so...
It is. I would have had to put in something else ahead of it, and yeah, it would have been messy.
But the Jordan 11 is this shoe. The iconic... this is the black and red version, not... Russ told me not to call it the bread.
I hate calling shoes bread.
It's not the playoff version. You said,
playoff
right?
version.
Yeah, we'll call it the playoff shoe. But you know, the patent leather on the bottom. I mean, Russ, you could talk us through it.
No, I mean honestly, like a lot of people consider this the best basketball shoe ever, and like just the balance of it is so crazy to me. Like just the way, especially with this colorway, the white midsole and the black patent leather, and I know it's a retro, and you can tell because it doesn't have the white edge on the patent, and the patent doesn't come up as high. There's all sorts of ways, and I'm sure maybe the carbon fiber isn't quite the same. But this shoe, so I had Jordans before the 11. I mean, to
probably had every
to talk
Jordan.
about me instead of Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
But I always got them on sale, and it's like I think that blows people's minds now, where it's like, every year, the Air Jordan went on sale. And this was the first one that I went and hunted down and paid retail for, which is kind of funny because I was already at Slam at the time. But I found a pair of the playoffs on Long Island, and they stayed in the box in my closet for years, and I never wore them outside. I would put them on and lace them up, and it was like I just couldn't bring myself to do that first wear in them. Like it was just too much. And I ended up finally selling them, and I made some money, but I think they'd already been retroed. So, it wasn't quite the same, but it's like you look at Jordan in them though, and it's just like, and I kind of went for everything. Like this photo is still the most incredible thing to me. Like I kind of talked about it in the book, even where it's like between the way the midsole was sculpted and the clear outsole, like it literally looked like he wasn't touching the ground. Yeah. And I guess his heel isn't touching the ground in that photo, which is probably also part of the reason.
I just like that they looked like a tuxedo, or, there was something that looked formal about them, and it might be the patent leather around the bottom. But I'd never really, a big part of this shoe is really kind of backing up, looking at the context of Michael Jordan at the time. And where his career was and kind of where he was going. And these shoes kind of ended up coming out at the perfect time to connect with MJ returning from his leave of absence and all that stuff.
And I think, it's funny, you look at Mike over the years, and I think if you were Tinker or if you were anyone at Jordan, you didn't want to send him shoes too early because you would absolutely wear them in a game.
Yeah.
And it's he did I talk about these as the playoff edition because he did wear them in the 96 playoffs where they go 72-10 and they win the title. But he actually debuted them in the 95 playoffs, which didn't go so well.
When they lost in the Magic.
Yeah. And
but that was when he had been gone for 2 years.
He's been gone. He played 17 games that season. Yeah. He did have his
He came back right at the end of the season. Yeah. And wore those in the playoffs. But then he comes back the next year and they start the next three-peat when he comes back the second time.
Right. And which started literally, I think, the second they lost that series to the Magic. Yeah. And Horace Grant gets lifted on the Magic's shoulders like the conquering hero, and it's like, all right, this isn't happening again. Those guys were back in the gym right afterwards, and that's where you get Tim Grover's myth being built up. Yeah. Not that he didn't do work, but still, there's mythology there. There's the Breakfast Club with Ron Harper and Scotty and Mike working out, and then having Mike's chef do food for them. Him filming Space Jam and having the Jordan Dome built on the studio lot and playing against and with guys, including Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
Previous arch enemy who basically was known for throwing Scotty into the stands when they were with the Bad Boys, but, you know, Dennis comes, plays 3 seasons with the Bulls, and wins 3 titles. So, yeah, for them to come back, and it's like, to me also, this shoe, it's kind of almost a futuristic Chuck Taylor, where it's like everything you need and nothing you don't.
Right.
There's nothing extra on this shoe, like the ballistic mesh with the lace loops up the side, the patent leather being its own kind of armor, that clear midsole, translucent midsole, letting you see the carbon plate in the bottom for flex and for helping with plantar fasciitis and everything. Like, I don't know, it's super cool. It's like a mix between a Chuck Taylor, a running shoe, and like a spaceship.
I should also say Russ and I are proponents of wearing your shoes, and this is my shoe. Like I wear this shoe from TUC, like,
and it still looks good. Like it's still in good shape.
It's got some little creases and stuff, but whatever. Like this shoe is, I've had this shoe for like 10 years now, and I wear it a couple times a year.
Well, the funny thing was I never wore my initial playoff pair, but I ended up getting retro pairs down the line, and I actually had a pair of the Space Jam shoe.
Yeah.
That didn't come out until 2000. Like, that was a retro, which is funny because he did the movie and they never
put them out.
Sold it right then. But I wore those a lot. And I remember, like, I wore them until they were super cooked. There was like a cut in the patent leather. I don't even know how I did it.
You remember at Slam, I had a pair. I had a pair of the white and black ones, and I used to wear them all the time for like about 2 years until you couldn't wear them anymore.
Are you wearing them in that New Yorker illustration of you?
I might be. I don't know. I wore those a lot. You mentioned the lace loops on this shoe, and like until I read your book, and you know, we know the history of Jordan sneakers and we know what they all look like, but I never really realized how closely this shoe looks to the 10 and the 9.
Yeah.
Like the 10 has those same lace loops, basically. The 9 kind of has the thing around the bottom that turns into patent leather on this shoe, but this shoe always just felt like it was like dropped out of a spaceship.
It felt brand new.
It was totally different and new. But then when I looked in the book at the 9 and the 10 and the 11 in context, you're like, oh, wait, this is sort of just an evolution of the 9 and the 10.
Yeah, and I think the 9, like, because they did turn the 9 into a boot. You know, the 9 was a little more of a boot. It had that internal booty, so there were like kind of 2 layers to it.
Yeah.
The 10 was more of a conventional, like, kind of leather build. And this, like, kind of stripped all that away. I mean, apparently Jordan wanted patent as early as the 9, and they just weren't able to work it out.
Yeah.
You know, I think, like, there's stories with the Tinker tells where, like, you know, he would do something on a Jordan, and someone on the higher level at Nike would be like, we can't do this. Right. Or like, do you really want, you know, are we really going to do this? And Tinker's move at that point would be to hand that person Michael Jordan's phone number and be like, are you going to tell Michael this?
Yeah.
And it would usually go through. But this shoe was another one that was designed while Mike was away.
Playing baseball.
You know, Mike was playing for the Birmingham Barons, being a weak-hitting
outfielder.
You know, outfielder couldn't hit the curveball.
We talked about that in the previous show. But, you know, 93, he leaves the NBA, goes off, starts playing for the Birmingham Barons. My dad saw him play. My dad went to a Birmingham Barons game in Birmingham. My grandfather lived in Alabama. We were there. They were at home. My dad was like, I'm going to see if I can go to a game. And he drove up to Birmingham and saw Michael Jordan get a hit. I think he actually got a home run because he only had like 5 the season.
Yeah.
But I think he actually hit a home run the game my dad was at. So he got to see Jordan play a game of baseball. I always like, you know, look, I've said it on this show and I've said it to you. And like, to me, like, Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time. There might be others to me, and I can make a fine delineation who are better. But to me, he's the greatest of all time. But then you look at how he was when he played baseball, and you're like, oh, well, like, he's a basketball player, but like, to me, it puts more like respect on like what Deion Sanders did or Bo Jackson did. Some of those other guys who played multiple sports and were great at multiple sports.
I think there is a difference if you play both sports all the way through.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, Jordan hadn't played baseball since Babe Ruth League. Like, it's not like he played at Carolina.
Right.
So Dean Smith would have had a heart attack probably.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, towards the end, he was getting close. You know, I think, like, it's funny because, like, Spike Lee did the baseball commercials where it's like, with Bill Buckner and Ken Griffey Jr. But he's trying. And he was I think there's a legit chance if there wasn't the baseball labor stoppage that he makes the White Sox roster.
I mean, he was also at the time 30, right? At
least closing in on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was it's not like he was an 18-year-old who could grind for a couple of years and figure it out.
Right.
He was he was in elite shape, but hitting a curveball is hard.
He did have plenty of money. Obviously the Birmingham Barons got an immediate upgrade in their bus when Mike got there, and they sold a lot of merch, and he played for, I think it was the Scottsdale Scorpions, I think was the Arizona League team. And it's interesting, that's kind of a big what if. If he goes and plays for the White Sox, and maybe that doesn't work out. Maybe the basketball itch was coming back regardless. But it's do you make this shoe just a cleat? This shoe did become a cleat. I have a pair somewhere of a pair they made for Deion Sanders when he was on the Reds.
NFL players wear them now. There's NFL players I've seen this season, guys wearing those.
And Randy Moss, I think, wore a version of those. The Deion story is pretty good, though. I got the Deion's at Nike had done a launch event on campus for Shocks.
Yeah.
And someone I knew who was an executive came up to me during that and is like, hey, I have these Deion Sanders cleats. Do you want a pair?
Yeah.
And a good lesson to know is if you're at Nike campus and an executive asks if you want something, say yes.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. And they're literally all black patent leather. They have a loop on the back to pull them on with a cross on it.
Yeah.
And I had them at my desk at Slam. And one day,
I brought Deion.
Or you brought Deion. Even better. You're part of this.
I brought Deion to the office one day. I had written a profile on him for King Magazine and given him my card. I spent a whole day with him at CBS Sports, where he was working at the time on the Sunday NFL shows or whatever. And I gave him my card. And 3 days later, he calls me at my desk. And he's like, hey, just wondering, do you need anything else? You good? And I was like, no, I think I'm good, man. I appreciate the follow-up. And he gives me his cell phone number. He's like, hey, call me sometime. So he had to come to New York every week to do the CBS show. He was living in Dallas or somewhere. So every weekend he would come to New York. And so we started talking. I went and hung out another Sunday with my wife, and we hung out with Deion and his whole crew behind the scenes. And then a couple weeks later, he was he calls me on a Friday or something, or Thursday. He's like, hey, I'm in New York. And I was like, why don't you come by the office? And so then he came to the Slam office, and you could pick it back up.
First of all, when are you going to Colorado?
Well, I don't talk to him anymore. I did ask him to officiate my wedding, and he said that he wasn't allowed to because I just changed out of my Deion shirt. He said he wasn't allowed to. He wasn't certified in the state of Georgia to do weddings.
Well, I mean, the rest of the story isn't a lot. You obviously brought him up. I see, or you told me, or I see him in the office. It's oh my God. So I had a paint pen, and I still had the shoes at my desk.
Yeah.
So I was like, Deion, can you sign these? And he did. And it's one of the greatest signatures I've seen on something because it's Deion Sanders and a Psalms verse.
Yeah.
But the S in Sanders is a dollar sign.
Yeah, of course.
So the idea of a dollar sign and a Bible verse is pretty impressive.
You know, when Deion would step into the batter's box, he used his bat and he would draw a dollar sign in the dirt before he'd step into there.
God. Yeah. Deion's one of a kind.
He's the best. He also, when I would call him, he would answer his cell phone, praise the Lord. It wasn't hello, it wasn't who is this or whatever. It was always just praise the Lord. Which is always interesting.
I hope he still does that.
He probably does. I don't know. Anyway, back to MJ. While Jordan was gone from the NBA, Nike was like, all right, we got to figure out who our next Jordan's going to be. And they kind of tried to thread a very big needle.
I think it was an odd time because you had, you did have Barkley. You did have, Penny was starting to come up. The Air Flight 1 was right around that time when Jordan came back.
Yeah.
You had Cheryl Swoops, but I think it was kind of a Jordan, sort of a precursor to what they did with Jumpman.
Yeah.
Which ended up being later, and that was Eddie Jones, Vin Baker, Michael Finley, a couple other guys. But then, you had
I remember Kendall Gill.
It was kind of Mike's picks, though. So you had Penny wearing the Jordan 9.
Mitch Richmond.
Spreewell. And then, it was two guards. It was Mitch Richmond,
Baby
Nick
Jordan.
Anderson, who Nick and
Ends
Kendall,
up-
I think, were both flying Illini.
Yeah.
And Harold Miner.
Yeah.
And then you would have some guys in the Bulls wear it. You know, I think
BJ Armstrong.
Yeah, there was always a little bit of like push and pull with that. I think, you know, Scotty wore Jordans a few times. Like later when you get into the Jordan 12, like Bill Wennington wore them, and I think Jordan was kind of not sure about that. And Luke Longley, because it was good for plantar fasciitis.
I'm going to wear these today then, because my plantar
Dogs are
fasciitis
barking?
is acting up. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, you had these other guys wearing it, and they even had like regional colors for their teams, but like clearly none of these guys were Michael Jordan.
Yeah. I also like that Tinker Hatfield wanted these to be laceless.
The early sketches of it, you know, like there was a way like the actual upper wrapped around. There was no tongue where it just kind of came through, and like eventually they did manage like slightly. Like they would do shrouds and all that stuff, and
because the tongue is like the one part of the shoe that's it's just sort of there. It doesn't have any logos or anything. It's just kind of it's just there to hold it all together.
I mean there were some things about that shoe, like even the laces. Like I don't know if on the retros they were they were almost ropes.
Yeah.
On the original, like I have a pair of the 1995 like Concords, the white ones, and like the laces are so thick. And it's funny because, and I do talk about it in the book a little bit, where it's like you had Jordan wearing them when he came back, and then Allen Iverson wore them at Georgetown. Yeah. And that was sort of the other, you know, almost a continuation of what the Fab Five had done. It's like you have Allen Iverson wearing these white and black Jordans at Georgetown with the black ankle brace that comes up above it.
Yeah.
Because even like, I mean, you talk about the tongue, like it's kind of hard to tighten those right.
Yeah.
Like just the way the layers of mesh and foam, and
especially if you don't go all the way to the top loop like Mike never did.
Yeah.
You know, like and I would never tie my Jordans to the top.
Neither did I.
Because I had to be like Mike. We wanted to be like Mike.
Yeah.
I always thought Jordan Brand should do it 1 year. The Air Jordan should have the top hole for the thing, but just not be a real hole. Just have like where it should be. So you can't lace it all the way. Just have it sewn in. That'd be a kind of cool little nod.
That would be a good idea.
You mentioned Iverson. Like, we're kind of running up on time on this chapter anyway, but we haven't talked about Iverson really at all because he's still going through high school at Georgetown at this time.
Yeah.
You mentioned in one of these previous shows we did that you thought like the one shoe that you really wanted to get in and you couldn't get in there was the question.
Yeah.
I mean, what Iverson sort of comes along right here, right? 96 drafts right around the corner from this.
Right.
And then Iverson and the NBA sort of goes young and changes pretty soon after this.
Yeah, and like to me, if you look at the question, I think the question does owe something to the Air Jordan 11.
Yeah.
You know, it has the same way with the lace loops and like even that suede toe. And the pearlized leather toe is a little bit reminiscent of the patent leather. It had a clear outsole. I think maybe because in part that was something that Iverson wore a lot of. And, you know, if you talk to Allen, even if you talk to him during his playing days when he was a Reebok guy, you know, he would always talk about getting his first pair of Jordans and talk about Mike being the guy. You know, he would watch like YouTube highlights of Mike from the beginning, like, Mike was always like Allen's lodestar.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I talked to David Falk for the book, like Falk really put Allen as the only guy who was close to Mike as far as being like a guy who could move units with a shoe.
Yeah.
And I think it's just interesting where like Mike was kind of the guy who hip hop and people involved in hip hop really looked up to. Like, obviously, Michael Jordan was cited in more songs than we can name.
Yeah.
But Mike was a Anita Baker guy.
Yeah.
Mike was a Kenny Lattimore guy. Yeah. You know, Mike was.
Is that the jazz he was listening to on The Last Dance?
When he like takes the meme with the headphones. You know, like I think Mike was like.
He started a smooth jazz label, basically. Remember, he had that Mike Phillips guy signed with it.
Yeah. No, and
saxophonist.
He grew up in like kind of rural North Carolina or suburban North Carolina.
But I know where you're going with this because then Iverson like actually put out a rap album.
Iverson was hip hop. You know, it's like You go into a Sixers locker room during
the
Iverson era, and if you went around and looked at like lockers, you would, unless you saw his number, you would never pick out Allen's by like his locker because he had probably the biggest gear of anyone.
Yeah, it looked like Matumbo's gear hanging in Allen's locker.
I think like
giant jeans.
And I was psyched on this cover. Like we did a slam cover with Allen in a suit.
Yeah, I remember.
And like it looks like he's shrinking because the suit is so big. Yeah. And I heard a story from Q Gaskins, who was Iverson's guy at Reebok.
Yeah.
That, like the tailor basically like quit because it's like Allen kept telling him to make it bigger and bigger, and it's like, no, like I won't do this. You know, everything was like super baggy, and Allen, like, you know, Jordan was the hip hop icon. Allen was hip hop.
Yeah.
Like, he came from that same background. He wanted the same things. You know, it's like you talk about rappers wanting to be basketball players and basketball players wanting to be rappers, and Allen was both.
Yeah. And we talked about the Jordan 1 and a couple episodes back, and I said to me that that's the most important basketball shoe of all time. To me, this is probably my favorite. Like I think the Jordan 11 is my favorite basketball shoe of all time, and it's just so, like you said, it's very simple, but it's also very formal, and it's kind of a beautiful shoe, for lack of a better word. And I don't know. To me, that's my favorite.
I mean, the balance of it, the use of materials, the way even it sits, like I said, like it looks like it's kind of floating a little bit. Like I think that's like the iconic Jordan thing. And also, like, I think one thing I learned, and probably part of the reason I didn't wear it when I was younger, is like no one makes a pair of Jordans look as good as Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually literally, as I finished saying that, I was thinking like I don't think I could actually play in these shoes. Like I would definitely, I feel like I'd kind of ruin them by playing in them. I actually wore these to Susan's wedding. Our friend Susan Price, who got married, I wore a pair of Jordan 11s because they look like shoes you would wear with a suit.
And people, I mean, over the years, I think have gone to prom in them. They've gotten married in them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they've had like such the second life.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, that takes us through chapter 11 for our purposes here on the podcast. We'll be back shortly with chapter 12. Go get Russ's book if you haven't gotten it yet, and come back in a couple of days for chapter 12. You're watching or listening to a History of Basketball and 15 Sneakers podcast from Grind City Media.
If you're looking for even more sneaker culture content, check out The Sneak Fest Show with me, Kelsey Ray Johnson, Sherman, Adam, and Jerry, live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Grind City Media YouTube and the brand new Grind City Media app.